So friends, Robert Moses is one of those super incredibly powerful people who you have never heard of before. But if you have ever been to New York City, and more specifically, if you've been driven around New York City at all, then you have most definitely experienced his influence at work. FDR Drive, the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, the Cross-Bronx Expressway, the West Side Highway, he built them all, and so much more. Though Robert Moses was born in Connecticut, he grew up in New York, walking its crowded streets and watching the city expand before his very eyes. Even as a young man, Moses saw the city differently. Where other people saw congestion, chaos, and grime, he saw potential. He saw the untapped spaces and undeveloped lands that could be transformed for the public good. And he dreamed of a city where public parks and green spaces and modern infrastructure could coexist with the urban sprawl, a place that could be shaped by vision and ambition. And Robert Moses set out to do just that. From 1934 until 1960, he served as New York City's park commissioner. And during that faithful tenure, he transformed the city in ways that to most would have seemed impossible in the best of days, but especially in the throes of the Great Depression. So with both his creative genius and a somewhat flexible relationship with the truth, he found ways of pulling together funding from all sorts of different sources, city, state, and federal programs that allowed him to undertake these absolutely massive public works projects that fundamentally reshaped New York City. He oversaw the creation of hundreds of parks and playgrounds and swimming pools, building an impressive array of public spaces around the city. He built Jones Beach on Long Island, and he extended the city's parkways, giving people access to green spaces and recreation, a lifeline for everyday New Yorkers at a time when both hope and resources were scarce. But with every park that he planted, with every road that he paved, with every swimming pool that he poured, Moses' power grew. And so did his ambitions. And what started as a public servant's mission to improve the lives of everyday New Yorkers soon enough became a personal crusade to leave his mark on the city, or perhaps better put, to impose his will on the city. Over time, Moses' projects got bigger, and his concern for the people that who got impacted by them got smaller. The highways, bridges, and tunnels whose construction he oversaw, each a symbol of his almost godlike control over the city's infrastructure, they started to displace entire communities. Vibrant immigrant and working class neighborhoods were torn apart, and the scars of those decisions can still be seen today, almost 100 years later. And perhaps the most infamous example of this, he started intentionally building bridges so low that buses couldn't pass underneath them, effectively blocking access to public beaches for the working class New Yorkers who relied on public transportation. So the very people that his earlier projects were meant to serve were now cut off from enjoying them almost completely. So in other words, Robert Moses began his career using his job as Parks Commissioner for the common good. But somewhere along the way, his work stopped being about serving others and started being about serving only himself, his legacy, his ambitions. Now, in our own lives, we might not wield the same kind of sweeping power that Robert Moses had, but we all still face that same basic choice. Whether we are a nurse, a cashier, an engineer, a secretary, a teacher, a social worker, a project manager, a bus driver, a psychiatrist, or even a lowly pastor, we all need to answer that same basic question. Will we use our job to serve others, or will we use it only to serve ourselves? Because any job, and I do mean any job, can go either way. Take, for example, An architect, and I lift it up because we have like 18 architects in our congregation. An architect might design sleek and towering buildings that draw attention, projects that earn them praise in glossy magazines and invitations to exclusive events, the kind of projects that serve the ultra-wealthy and come with fat paychecks. Or that same architect can choose a different path. They can use those same skills to create spaces that serve the wider public. They can design buildings who prioritize accessibility and function, places where everyone, regardless of income or ability, feels welcome. They can use that same vision to create housing and schools and public spaces that can uplift entire communities. Every blueprint they draw has the potential to serve others or to serve only themselves. But think also of the construction worker who's helping build that very same project. Yes, they may spend their days lifting heavy beams and mixing concrete and laying bricks, but they have some choices that they have to make too. They can take pride in every brick they lay, knowing that they are creating safe homes and schools where family and children can thrive, or, as we see so often, they can rush through that work, cutting corners that will impact the safety and stability of the structure that they're building, because they care only about getting the job done and moving on to that next paycheck. Even in hard, physically demanding work, there's a choice to be made every day to put effort in for the good of others, or to focus only on ourselves and finishing fast and getting on to the next paycheck. And for the retired architects and construction workers among us, I want you to know that even in retirement, you face that same basic choice. With the newfound freedom of no longer being tied to the day-and-day drudgery of a specific job, retirees get to choose anew what they're going to do with all that hard-earned wisdom and experience. They can choose to help others navigate the challenges that they themselves once faced, becoming mentors for younger generations. They can employ their skills as volunteers at local charities and nonprofits. They can give their time to their church, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Or that same retiree can say, I've put in my time already. From now on, my life is going to be just about me. They can head out to the golf course. They can head out to happy hour, what have you. So what I'm trying to get at here is that in every profession and at every stage of life, whether we are just starting out in our careers or reflecting back on a lifetime of work, the choice remains to use our gifts, our time, and our talents for the good of others, or to focus only on ourselves and our own desires. And I don't think it will come as a great surprise to any of us here gathered this morning, but this morning's reading from the book of 1 Peter, and really the whole of the Christian tradition, comes down pretty decisively on the side of encouraging us to use our gifts, our times, and our talents for the sake of others. God has given each of you a gift from a great variety of spiritual gifts. This morning's reading says, use them well to serve one another. And while that is certainly some very solid, some very Christian advice, there remains for us, I think, that ever-pressing question of why? Why? Why should we spend our time, our talent, our work life serving other people? Why should we invest in others when we could just as easily invest in our own comfort, our own success, and our own security? Great question. I'm glad you asked it. So if we were to step back and read all of chapter 4 from which this morning's reading came, we would see that Peter's advice to serve others is part of a larger teaching about what it looks like to live a life in real connection with God, to live a life in sync with the deeper purposes for which we were created. So when Peter calls us to offer our gifts to serve others, he's not so much offering moral advice as he's inviting us into something much bigger. He's inviting us into the very way that God intends for us to live. Service isn't about being nice or doing good things. Rather, it's about how we tap into what God is already doing in the world. By serving others, we find ourselves stepping into the life that God has always intended for us. It's literally what we were created to do. But there's another level here, too, I think, that is a little less theological, a little less grandiose, and a little bit more self-interested. I think it's safe to say that all of us here are searching for purpose. All of us want, at the end of our days, for our lives to have meant something. All of us hunger for something deeper. And while you might not use these words, all of us are seeking, we're thirsting after that deep soul satisfaction. And we find that no matter how successful we get, no matter how high we climb, no matter how fat our paychecks are, it still feels like there is something missing. And Peter's message reminds us that the satisfaction we're chasing isn't going to come from any particular job or another. Rather, it's about how we use whatever job we have to impact the people around us. That's where real purpose comes from. The kind of deep, lasting satisfaction we're searching for doesn't come from focusing inward. It comes from living outward. So when we ask, why should we serve? The answer, according to Peter, is pretty clear. Because it's how we were made to live. To serve is to live the life we were created for, a life full of meaning, a life full of connection, and a life full of purpose. And the most beautiful part of all of this, I think, is that we're not being asked to do anything that God's self, has not already done. The kind of life that Peter describes for us is exactly how Jesus himself lived. He took every ounce of influence he had and used it not to advance his own interests, but to heal the broken, to lift the lowly, and serve the world around him with reckless abandon. And perhaps the most powerful example of this, on the night before he died, knowing the full weight of what was to come, what did Jesus choose to do? He got down on his knees and he washed his disciples' feet. The Son of God on the floor serving. An act so humble, so shocking that it left his own followers speechless in the moment. So where Robert Moses offers us a cautionary tale, Jesus offers us a roadmap. Yes, Moses' project shaped New York City. His bridges and highways and parks still stand today. But here's the thing. Before this morning, you had never heard of Robert Moses. Had anyone heard of Robert Moses? Okay, wait. Trying to mess up my sermon. I see what you're doing here. Okay, let me rephrase this. Before this morning, the vast majority of you had not heard of Robert Moses. Because while he did a lot of building in the city, he ultimately was serving only himself. His legacy, though impressive in stone and steel, has not endured in the same way, because what truly lasts isn't what we build with our hands, it's in the lives that we touch, in the people that we serve. And by contrast, who here has heard of Jesus before? The vast majority of you have heard of Jesus before. That is because he built something far greater. He built relationships. He built communities. He changed lives. And that is why we are still talking about him Sunday after Sunday, 2,000 years later. His legacy isn't measured in monuments, but in the love and the grace that he poured out for others. So as we move through our days and our lives and our work, let's ask ourselves, how are we using what we have been given? Are we using our jobs, our gifts to lift others up? Or are we serving only ourselves? Because in the end, it's not about what we accomplish for ourselves, but about how we impact the lives around us. That's the legacy that matters. That's the life that truly matters. And friends, in Jesus' name, may it be so. Amen.